to the Jay Kim Show, Hong Kong's first dedicated podcast on investing in Asia. Join us as we survey the land and discover the greatest companies and most profitable investment opportunities in Asia. If this is your first time listening, thank you for stopping by. This podcast is produced every week with the goal of providing actionable insights to you, the listener, with every single episode. And now, on to the show. This week's show guest is Bhaskar Prabhakara, co-founder and CEO of WeInvest. WeInvest is one of Asia's leading digital wealth providers, helping banks, brokers, and wealth managers launch a full suite digital investing experience for their relationship managers and customers. Bhaskar, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you for having us here.
Yes, we're happy to speak with you and have you on the show and learn more about your company. So before we dig into exactly what WeInvest is, maybe you can give us a little bit of personal background of yourself, who you are, where you're from originally, and how you came up to becoming an entrepreneur.
Sure. So I grew up in India, and I after finishing my engineering and my MBA degrees from some pretty good colleges, started off in banking. Was part of ICICI, India's largest private bank at that point of time, working on creating some structured products. And then I moved on into consulting and traveled across the Bay Area to London, spent some time consulting with Charles Schwab, Reuters, and pretty much a lot of the capital market investment banking clients in London, like Goldman, Credit Agricole, CMC Markets, and so on. I spent almost 8 years there in London before moving to Singapore in 2012, where I used to head up the Asian business of the same capital markets consulting firm called Headstrong. And over these years with Headstrong, I'd built up businesses from scratch, working with a lot of capital markets organizations in moving what you call brick and mortar models into digital business models. And when it occurred to me that, I've been building business for others, we got acquired, and I said, why shouldn't I try and do it for myself? And hey, wealth seemed like a very personal problem, growing from being a mass market investor to let's call it an affluent investor to a high net worth investor. The problem hadn't gotten any easier, but it actually seemed that it had gotten a bit worse. So we said, why not? Let's try and solve the problem. We used to taking brick and mortar models and making it into a digital business model. And there were lots of opportunities here. So 2014 is when we embarked on thought of WeInvest.
Right. So back to your experience before that, you did a number of you've done a number of consulting type jobs, working directly with sort of wealth managers, large investment banks, global investment banks. What were the actual solutions that you were working on at these banks that sort of helped you along the way? I know that you obviously have vast international experience, but what was the actual solutions that you were working on at the various banks?
Sure. So a couple of examples were we were working with Goldman on building out some of the electronic trading connectivity, high frequency connections to exchanges. We embarked on one of the dark pool exchange programs where we were going to try and do matching of orders and across a variety of asset classes.
Okay.
We worked with CMC Markets, where it was a proper market maker on contract for differences as a product. And it was literally 40 sales traders calling out clients and getting them to trade. We converted it into an entire digital platform where right from clients getting onboarded to getting online tutorials to make their first trades to being able to work on next generation front end to trade in CFDs to being able to actually from a back end perspective do real-time position keeping and connectivity to multiple prime bookers to, again, the whole feedback loop. And I think that CMC experience was phenomenal because it was really taking an end-to-end play and making it a completely digital model. And then I moved here, as I said, and then worked with folks like Macquarie and moving a lot of their capital markets work to different areas. We implemented the new exchange in Malaysia, in Bursa Malaysia stock exchange. So it was a lot of capital markets, trading, connectivity, uh, getting an end-to-end flow of business going in. With some of the asset managers, we worked on kind of building out more position keeping and bookkeeping kind of platforms with them to kind of more or less stay in trend with what was happening from a real-time client reporting perspective.
Right. So are you currently based in, is it Singapore or Malaysia right now?
No, I've been based in Singapore for the last 6 years.
Right. Okay. So it sounds like you do have a vast amount of experience in both banking and technology, and so you're able to sort of draw on those experiences from your past to create a solution, which I guess today is called WeInvest. Was there any sort of personal type pain points? When you were talking about growing your wealth and wealth management that led you down this path to basically where you said earlier, you referenced that you said, hey, why don't we just give it a go and try to solve this problem ourselves? Was there a particular experience that you had that led you to that point? Like how did you stumble upon, obviously there's many sort of solutions out there that you could have tried to tackle and go after. Why this particularly? Why, sort of a wealth management type solution?
Sure. Well, kind of goes back to background in terms of we came out from some of the best colleges, but came from a very middle class background. So, and given the whole mindset of having to save and then invest, I did start investing quite early on.
Mm.
Typically, we used to do real estate investments, which was fine, but then there was obviously a lot of issues around, how do you kind of get liquidity in an estate, in an asset class like real estate? How do you try and then start investing in financial assets? At least in Western Europe, there were what you call a lot of low cost brokerages. But as we moved into Asia and we were starting to look at how do you invest, and we'd kind of grown, I guess, over as a family into a slightly more affluent to high net worth situation. The number of products is obviously wide, pretty wide in terms of the choices. Uh, but in terms of getting advice, it didn't seem like the easiest kind of area to find a trustworthy advisor. A lot of IFAs of independent financial advisors seem to have taken a very mutual fund oriented or insurance oriented route to get a really high kind of sales charge and kind of trailer fees. Um,
Right.
Many of the banks were also charging pretty obscenely high sales charges, and the private banks were maybe just a bit out of the reach. So at least on an affluent level, I felt that it was not really easy if you didn't have a very good understanding as to what are you getting charged. And hence we both from a family perspective have been working in the financial industry, and we kind of started investing on our own. But I said if someone like us who's pretty well educated, who's worked in the financial industry, is finding it tough to potentially kind of get unbiased advice and maybe low cost investment opportunities, the problem must be much worse across the other sectors or segments. Um, and hence, that's the personal pain with which we started saying, hey, how do we try and make investing easier?
Yeah, that's that. Yeah, so this is interesting actually because I come from a finance background as well. I mean, I spent a number of years on the sell side on Wall Street working at various investment banks, and now I'm a full time investor. I work at a hedge fund, and I'm also a private equity investor. And I've kind of had to learn a lot of that on my own, despite the fact that I spent a career on Wall Street. And I think you're right because a lot of times when you join Wall Street, you get pigeonholed into a certain specialty, and so it's kind of one of those things where I would go to like a family reunion and people would ask me, "Hey, so how should I invest my money?" And the advice that you're used to giving to clients, say on Wall Street and this sort of thing, is completely different than you would give to an individual from both a sort of a risk profile to even the complexity of the instruments that you'll be using to invest, to be trading, right? So I completely understand where you're coming from. Having said that, so why don't we dive into your business? So, we invest. Tell us a little bit about, first of all, the team. How did you get started? Who are your co-founders? And maybe just give us a broad overview of what the actual business is.
Sure. So I'll give you a quick overview of team. So it's the three of us who are the team of co-founders. Anant, who's the CTO, came from a pretty distinguished background of being the CTO at WeLend, which has launched, I think, a huge number of P2P lending kind of a business across Hong Kong and China, and an extremely successful kind of startup. It's no longer one. In terms of it's a unicorn.
Right.
And he was there for almost 3.5 years. Before that, he was with Standard Chartered, running the Breeze program, which is if you're a Standard Chartered users and use their mobile app, that's called Breeze.
Right.
And he kind of spent his early years in technology in Oracle and Amazon. Gone through the whole phase of changing and evolving technologies in Amazon, and then working in fintech, both in Standard Chartered and also in WeLand. Rajesh, on the other hand, who's the COO, started off setting up operations, and he did a lot of operations in India, setting up operations bases for both HSBC and Lehman Brothers across Bombay and Pune. And then he did his startup stint with an ad tech exchange called Pubmatic.
Right.
And then was in the US when we touched base and we got talking about what we were going to do, and then kind of moved to India to kind of be the whole anchor for us in India. And Anand and I got introduced through a mutual friend of ours, and the whole thing made sense.
Got it. Okay, so let's talk a very basic about the company and your business model itself. What exactly does WeInvest do? If you could explain it from a very high level, and then kind of if you could walk us through sort of the user experience, if you will.
Perfect. Okay. So while we were thinking of making the whole experience of investing a lot easier, Um, WeInvest basically focuses on ensuring the fact that it can be done from an end user, or a, let's call it, a individual investor perspective, who's typically, let's, a mass market investor
Hmm.
or emerging affluent investor. But we also ensure the fact that we make investing easier through a relationship manager. So that's largely the affluent to high net worth clients who use a relationship manager. So for both sides of the segments, we build different solutions, and they're called GrowWealth and AdviseWealth. GrowWealth is a self-service advisory platform, and AdviseWealth is an RM-assisted advisory platform. And the whole idea is these digital wealth platforms, we white label it for banks, brokers, asset managers, insurance companies, to basically ensure the fact that their clients can get access to a next generation investment experience.
I see.
So we are not a direct B2C kind of business. What we built is an entire stack of not just technology, but also investment strategies, the operations to support a wealth management business, to actually managing the whole platform on the cloud. And we launched this for multiple kind of firms. So we just launched over the last month a robo advisory platform with CGS CIMB, one of the largest security firms in Southeast Asia.
Mhm.
We launched a self-service advisory platform with OCBC Bank, the second largest bank in Singapore. And we have multiple launches coming up, one with the largest bank in Thailand, a couple more in the Middle East, and one in the UK.
Wow. Okay. It sounds like you guys are getting some great traction then. So let's dig in a little bit deeper. So let's say, for example, okay. So my understanding is it's basically a almost like a SaaS product that is white labeled with the end user, the end sort of host, which is probably a bank or an advisor, a wealth manager, or a relationship manager, right? Now, if let's say let's just take OCBC for example. Let's say I'm a customer of OCBC, and I have an account there, and I want to use is GrowWealth the one that would be the one that I would be using via their platform, or AdviseWealth?
Yeah, so GrowWealth is what you would be using in OCBC or CIMB.
Hmm.
Uh, and let's give you a quick overview, right? So
Hmm.
there are again multiple journeys which we have enabled there. So let's say you're a not so sophisticated investor. Let's say you're a newbie to investing.
Yes.
You could go in, and there across different versions, there are slightly different nuances, but you could go in and set up your goal, go through a risk profiling in one case, whereas in other case, you could just choose a risk profile and then get recommended an investment portfolio which is potentially suitable given your kind of financial position and your risk profile. Uh, Going forward, you could kind of completely do an online onboarding uh, onto the platform, providing all the documents and making all this the potential kind of documents uploads done, and then you could also kind of go ahead, make the instant transfer, and within a day your portfolio is set up. So it's a classic 1.0 robo advisory kind of a journey. And I use robo advisory only because it's a common nomenclature, but not that I love the term. But on the other hand, if you're a sophisticated investor, you could potentially go and explore what we call a wide variety of managed account portfolios. These range across thematic investments to other kind of passive long-term asset allocation investments, which means the fact that you could invest for the short term to medium term with some of these thematic baskets you really kind of associate yourself with. And some themes are extremely interesting, right? So I could associate with, for example, clean energy or water, or maybe even Yummy, which invests in chocolate snacks and coffee.
Mm.
On the other hand, maybe slightly more sophisticated hedge fund investor like you could maybe associate with rising interest rates as a theme,
Right.
or Australian financials, uh, or Trumponomics, which is around the Trump's industrial policy
Hmm.
of increasing infrastructure spending. So there are a variety of these themes which I feel are far more relatable for end investors in today's world rather than the long-winded kind of unit trust or some of the structured product names. So you could take either of these journeys as an end investor and completely go through an advisory process online, along with obviously real-time reporting, notifications. You could get advice maybe once in a few months saying, hey, you rebalancing your portfolio, either given market movements or the fact that your portfolio is deviated from the asset allocation significantly. So we want to kind of get it back. And which is typical of any kind of systematic investing parlance.
Right. Yeah. I'm curious. How did the strategies? Where do the strategies come from? Basically, I mean, if you're using let's go back to the example of that you just gave. Of let's say you wanted to do thematic investing and you wanted some exposure in in Trumponomics, like you said, like where does that strategy come? Who puts that together? How does that get populated, and how does that get expressed in the form of an investment product?
Good question. So you call us a SaaS, which is typically software as a service, typically provided on the cloud. We call ourselves typically a platform as a service because we provide an end-to-end digital wealth as a service. And the primary reason being that the investment strategies are also provided by the platform.
Hmm.
And we also run a lot of the operational support, however small and minimal it is, including, let's say, client onboarding, related ops, or even trade reconciliation or valuation or any other operation support required. But coming back to the strategies, we Chiranjit is one of our core team members. Came in again very early on, almost 2.5 years back. Um, he came from a background of running prop strategies in J.P. Morgan, Citibank, Nomura, Lehman Brothers, and we said, hey, why don't we kind of try and build on what strategies you've been working on in the past and try and make them even more what do you call systematic and algorithmized.
Hmm.
So we use a variety of approaches across passive asset allocation, and for the thematics, a lot of factor-based kind of systematic investing models.
Right.
We largely believe in a QVM, quality, value, and momentum-based factor-based investing model to
Hmm.
construct a lot of these portfolios. And we kind of created almost 50, 55 of them. But that's not the only piece, right? We also went ahead and collated strategies from a variety of index providers, MSCI, S&P, Morningstar, some of the other asset managers like Schroders, um, some of the specialist kind of quant firms from UK. Uh, One of them came out of Morgan Stanley Investment Management, and we have what's called a global brand strategy from them. So our view is the fact that it's not just our strategies, but you should be able to get the best of all worlds by getting the best of systematic investing strategies from across a variety of players. And the financial institution we deal with is pretty much kind of open to either only use their strategies, which are their in-house strategies, or choose from the best of what we have in the marketplace.
Right. It makes a lot of sense. As far as the advise wealth vertical, maybe you could walk us through that quickly.
Well, yes, and that's been maybe one very interesting piece because actually that emanated a lot of customer feedback which we were getting really early on in late 2015, uh,
Hmm.
which kind of led us to build AdviseWealth. The relationship manager as a channel has always been a very important one, especially in the affluent to high net worth, whether you call it premier priority banking in a retail bank or in the private banking space. Uh, but the pace at which that affluent to high net worth segment is growing, to the pace at which RMs or relationship managers are being able to scale in terms of numbers, is obviously widely different. And apart from that, you obviously have challenges around compliance controls. You also have challenges around travel, productivity being a key issue, and how do you really engage clients. And we felt that a lot of these were related to the fact that uh, the RM was almost kind of left as here's some information which we will send to you on email. Here's a whole bunch of forms for you to fill. Here's an investment advisor or a product team if you're in a pretty tier one institution, but in the other cases, it was not even there. But off you go. And we felt that there was a pretty good opportunity. And if you look at some of the models in US or even in mainland Europe, the RM has been required to be digitally enabled to kind of make him as productive as possible, not only in the advisory process, but also ensure the fact that the back end process is as straight through automated as possible in order to
Right.
make the whole experience. And that's part of being our whole philosophy across all the products. It's digital wealth or digital kind of solutions is not about only a user experience, which I call as the tip of the iceberg. I mean, you could really have a great, amazingly well designed front end experience, but if the back end is not as digitally kind of straight through as the front end is, it just doesn't kind of make sense as an end-to-end digital proposition. So we focused on a lot of straight-through processing through the middle office, back office slash right down to execution connectivity and being able to execute trades straight through with some of the best brokers around in the world. And that whole process helped us in then saying, at the relationship manager level, we're going to help him go through his entire series of tasks, be it analyzing clients and analyzing client positions, being able to convince them on what they should be doing next, to being able to manage their portfolio through alerts, notifications, through a wide variety of ideas and news and research. So, an end to end kind of enablement of the relationship manager so that he can run his entire business of advising and managing people's money on a tablet and basically be extremely mobile, never have to come back to the office unless he really wants to kind of spend some time with his colleagues or with the products team, is what we kind of went for. And we therefore
Hmm.
call it what we call the Jarvis suit or the Iron Man suit for the RM for him to kind of be on micro boosters.
Yeah, I mean it makes sense as well. I mean, I'm just thinking, I have a relationship manager at a private bank, which I won't name, but he's very good. But I'm just thinking how traditionally a lot of the banks were the private banks were the bankers and the RMs were forced to exclusively sell their own in-house products, and they still are to a certain extent. But I've seen that shift a bit now, and they're actually opening up to basically catering around the needs of the client, regardless of if their institution can provide that or not. So that's good to hear. But it sounds like the advice wealth is something. Let's say if I were in their shoes and I was a relationship manager, it'd be nice to have basically a seamless platform like you described, that I can basically access out of the office on my tablet, and take care of all of my clients and track everything, remotely. So it sounds like a pretty good value proposition that you have there. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the economics of how WeInvest makes money, and then how sort of how does the fees work? I mean, I imagine it's sort of a subscription type model from the banks and the counterparties that use you, but is there any sort of incentive fees when one of the end products gets used or invested into?
So we have a wide variety of what you call models, primarily because when we do the platform as a service, which is, and I call the 6 or 7 parts of the iceberg or the entire service we deliver as front end user experience on the technology, the middle and back office technology, the investment strategies, the uh, the market data, and all the infrastructure connectivity to variety of exchanges, the operational support on managing this platform, to also the infrastructure support when it comes to technology infrastructure, and we run it on the cloud in AWS and other cloud providers. When I provide that entire stack, I'm basically running your business, right?
Hmm.
Of wealth management. And when we do that entire stack and we provide that as a comprehensive service, which we call PaaS or platform as a service or digital wealth as a service, we do charge an AUM based fee. For other models, which is akin to typical fintech players, where either I'm going to kind of provide you only the technology and I'm going to provide you the technology and install it in your kind of enterprise infrastructure, we do go by kind of per user pricing sometimes or a license fee model. Uh,
Right.
if although we've not had a SaaS install, but where someone just wants the technology and nothing else, um, we're maybe doing one of that right now in Thailand. But we're also going to expand that into a PaaS model at some in the next phase. Um, we then charge a license fee again or a per user model or SaaS fee model.
Interesting. I like how I like how you call it, define it, the platform as a service, or wealth management as a service, so to speak. I think it's that's a unique way of explaining what your company does. So Bhaskar, can you tell us a little bit about your future plans for the coming year? I mean, I know you guys did a funding round not too long ago. I believe it's Series A. Where are you guys looking to expand to? You obviously have a pretty big presence here in within Asia and the region. What are your goals for the rest of the year and looking into 2019?
Sure. I mean, it's been a pretty good year. As I said, we've ramped up to over 7 clients and looking to almost double that figure in the next uh, after 1 year. And it's purely around expansion across regions. So North Asia, Southeast Asia, which is our home base, to the Middle East, where we already have clients kind of going live soon. Second aspect is obviously deepening what we call the product and uh, broadening it in terms of asset class scope and some of the other nice to have functionality, and basically getting to an industrial scale of being uh, able to run almost 15 implementations at a go. We see some phenomenal demand across the region, um, across a wide variety of institutions. And the whole idea is, while we're running a pretty ambitious end-to-end stack from a technology perspective, also we still want to continue to be very nimble and run implementations which are less than 6 months in duration for the first phase, at least. We've looked at in the past, when it comes to these big what we call the behemoths of wealth technology, an average implementation was around 18 months to 24
Hmm.
some cases. Too long, sometimes a number of them failed or have huge cost overruns when it comes of launching a new platform to support an existing business model, right? Versus we said that we want to try and ensure the fact that we are able to launch within 6 months, and we've kind of stuck to that in every single instance so far of launching it uh, within a good period of time with a certain amount of functionality, and then continuously improving on that platform with them. and that requires us to do a lot of changes, ensuring the fact that we are very microservices API based from a technical architecture perspective, ensure the fact that we are able to build a lot of operations automation even more than what we have already. Um, I know I love the conversation which we had with one of our ops leads around 2 weeks back in Bangalore, where he said, in 3 years, I would want to kind of reduce my ops team potentially into half and hopefully not have to scale that at all, because a lot of it can be automated and we continue to automate it every single month.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting what's happening, the disruption that's happening in within finance and wealth management, and I mean the macro is correct and it's right. You guys are aligned perfectly. I mean, I think it's every week now I'm reading another article on Bloomberg or one of these news sources that talks about the number of wealthy people in Asia and the number of millionaires coming out of China or billionaires or whatever the number is now. And then on the same token, equally as frequent, I read about how traditional sort of finance is getting basically it's a sunset industry. How technology is disrupting everything, and the rise of things such as robo advisory and the stuff factor based investing and systematic investing, like you talk about. So, I'm excited for you guys at WeInvest. I think that you guys are onto something good, and we're looking forward to sort of tracking your progress and seeing how you guys grow. Last two questions I have for you, Bhaskar, and thanks again for your time and for sharing your story. The second to last question that I have is, and I like to ask this for a lot of entrepreneurs, is a piece of advice that you could give to our audience listening in, and this is probably particularly relevant to a lot of our audience members because of your background, having had a career, touching a lot of the financial services industries, and then coming out from there and having the sort of audacity to do a startup, and you're obviously very well seasoned professional. You're not like a young kid coming out of college trying to do a startup. So I feel like there's a lot of people that might be in the shoes that you were in, before you started this, had this itch or this desire to do a startup, but they're constrained by the financial system or by the nice paycheck or whatever their personal constraints were. So, if you had one piece of advice that you could give to aspiring entrepreneurs, what would that be?
Uh, One piece of advice, I'd kind of break it up into three things, but I'll keep it very crisp if you want me to do that. Um, I think the most important thing is to be flexible. We all come out, I think, when we're thinking about it, working in a space to kind of we have a certain passion and a certain idea which we think is the next big thing. But I think it's also very, very important to be able to hear feedback and really go and stress test that while you're even building out things and while you're even kind of seeing feedback, to be able to kind of change directions, pivot, add new things, or cut out something which was very close to your heart. I think that's maybe been, I think, something which I've seen across so many other pretty decently successful people. The second point I think is extremely important is please stay extremely frugal. You may have been bankers, you may have been extremely well performing executives, but there's a lot which you can squeeze out of every single dollar.
Mm.
But I think the most important thing is you really need to ask yourself if you have the right amount of tenacity, because it is going to test you. It's going to test you emotionally. It is going to test a lot of your confidence abilities. You may have great contacts, but it's not necessarily that every single contact or even those contacts are going to be extremely helpful in the context which of the problem you're trying to solve. Um, so it's got you got to be really tenacious and just keep plugging on. Forget the last bad week and just try and figure out what you can do in the next week to kind of make things better.
Absolutely. I actually personally like your second piece of advice about frugality, because I think that if you come from a banking background, you're probably not that used to. You're probably used to a higher standard of living than a startup founder is. Most startup founders are. So frugality is obviously a core tenet of wealth building, and obviously when you're trying to build a company, you want to, like you said, squeeze as much juice out of every dollar as possible. Um, it's been such a pleasure, and thank you again for sharing your story. The last question is simply, where can people find you, follow you, connect with you, and maybe learn a little bit more about WeInvest?
Uh, LinkedIn.
Okay, you're on LinkedIn. We'll connect with you on LinkedIn. We'll have your profile linked up, and then it's weinvest.com. Is that right?
WeInvest.net.
.net. That's right. Okay. Well, great. We'll get that all linked up. And again, Bhaskar, it's been great hearing your story. Thanks for sharing the journey with us, and we look forward to hearing more good news as you guys build out your company. So best of luck to you.
Thanks, Jay. Really appreciate it.
All right, great. Take care.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. All the show notes and links can be found over at jkimshow.com. Come back often and make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. Don't forget to join us next week for another exciting episode of The Jay Kim Show. I'd love to hear your comments. You can find me on Twitter at JayKimmer, JayKimmer. See you guys next week. This podcast is brought to you by Hack Your Fitness, the high achiever's guide to getting ripped in under 3 hours a week. If you're anything like me, you're probably working a full-time job or jobs and trying to find time to balance family life, social life, and last but not least, fitness. Look, I get it. I'm a full-time investor and entrepreneur myself, and father of two. So how am I able to stay fit year-round without spending hours and hours in the gym killing myself on the cardio machine? After struggling for the last 15 years trying every workout and diet under the sun, I finally designed a system that allows me to achieve and maintain single-digit body fat for life in under 3 hours a week. Cardio not required. Head on over to hackyour.fitness and download my free 13-page guide that teaches you the simple science behind efficient fitness and smart nutrition and gives you everything you need to know to finally take control of your life. That's hackyour.fitness.